Texas session is almost over, which means summer is just around the corner. I mean, to me, that sounds like sweet tea weather. But also we have the Diddy Trial that's still going on, the Cannes Film Festival that you're seeing all over Instagram. So let's start spilling some sweet tea. Welcome back, everyone, to the Sweet Tea series. My name is Ariana Guajardo. Thank you so much for joining me today because we're wrapping up some session stuff and I need help navigating through all the stuff that's happened, all the stories going on. So we invited back the senior editor of the Texan, McKenzie DiLullo. Welcome back.
I'm so glad to be back.
So how much sleep do you guys actually get during session? That's the biggest thing I've been wondering about.
Such a good question. It depends on the night. And I will say, I think there have been far fewer late nights and I should knock on wood saying that because we still have 2 weeks left and it's going to be
that's when it'll
crazy
happen,
last 2 weeks. But it depends on who you are and what beats you're following. So my reporters are far more frequently at the Capitol past midnight than I am. But occasionally I'll join them and just hang out and watch
Do
what's
they
going
rotate
on.
Or do some of them like specialize, I guess, in different areas?
Exactly. They specialize. So we
Okay.
kind of break it down based on chamber. So Cameron will make sure to follow the Senate. Brad and Mary Elise follow the House. But then it's also issue based. So whether it be, school choice or the border or, just a myriad of different issues, they're following those specific issues too. So if Cameron's in the Senate, but his school choice bill is in the House, he's going to be in the House following that.
Because it's a Senate bill or also the issue, I guess.
It crosses over across the chamber. Yeah. And that's the whole, the legislature has so many different ways they can pass a bill. But essentially for the school choice, it went through the Senate, went over to the House. And
that was a really late night, right?
Yes.
It's like 2 a.m., I think?
Actually, no, it was a House bill. So I'm totally wrong on that. But there's the Senate's working on it's already signed and passed into law.
Yes.
Like the governor's already said, I'm good. We're set. Let's pass school choice and get it done. But regardless, it was a very big. They called it the Texas two-step with like school finance and school choice. So it was a big deal.
I love whenever we come up with funny names for stuff in Texas, for stuff like that. So the Texas two-step. In the past, I remember one that still lives in infamy is the Mother's Day Massacre.
Ugh.
And then this year,
I
you
worked
guys
in the
had
Capitol during the Mother's Day
did you?
Massacre, and it was like one of my favorite days.
Okay, we're going to go into a different massacre that happened this year. But what was the Mother's Day Massacre? Because that's the one that everyone still talks about.
I'm so glad you asked. So this was the 85th legislative session. It was my first. It was like the
And
first.
what year was that then?
That was 2017.
Okay.
So this was almost. It's 8 years ago. We're nearing a decade on that one. But it was when the Freedom Caucus in the Texas House was first established. That was the first session when the Freedom Caucus was established. House Speaker Joe Straus was still holding the gavel, who was certainly drawn the ire of the lieutenant governor and the governor and a lot of grassroots activists, conservative activists across the state. Like he was certainly not liked. And this was in large part a show of defiance against him. And so I remember there were a bunch of members who got together in the Freedom Caucus and said, we want to kill as many bills as possible on the local and consent calendar, which are basically supposed to be uncontroversial or local bills that pass unanimously through committee. So it's kind of like an auctioneer. They get through those bills a lot faster, right? They're not the
what are
big
examples of
issues.
those again?
Like a municipal utility district, for example, or renaming a highway. Those kinds of things you'll find on a local and consent calendar. Or if it's just passed out of committee unanimously, it's eligible. But in defiance, they wanted to go ahead and these members in the Freedom Caucus decided to sign their names, which is a House rule. You could do this, sign their names to a list and say, we want to kill this slate of legislation. And they held a press conference in the lobby in front of the House chamber. And it was wild. It was so wild. And it was a long day. Folks were tired. And as soon as this press conference happened, people were like, oh my gosh. I remember members walking over to the Senate because it was Mother's Day. So it was midway through May and members were concerned that senators would be mad that their bills were getting killed. It was a wild, wild day, but it was fun. And those are the kind of moments like staffers and folks in and around the Capitol live for. Are those
So by that point,
moments.
that was the drama happening towards the end of session. For the stuff, well, actually, this sessions had random little
drama
bits of drama here and there. But this massacre was the Maundy Thursday Massacre. And also, I always forget every single session that Easter happens right in the middle of all of this.
Yes.
So, I'm Holy Week, doing Holy Week things.
And session's still happening. Yes.
But my husband, so he's like, super dedicated reader to the Texan. Usually whenever I'm reading articles, it's whenever he's sending them to me throughout the day.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So Tony and I were eating dinner together and he had Brad's article that's like, and he's like, what what is this about? And it says the Maundy Thursday Massacre, the Maundy Massacre.
Yeah.
And so we read it together and then called Brad.
Oh, that's so funny.
About it. So, I mean, what happened on Maundy Thursday this year?
Well, right before this, you were mentioning this is a potential topic, and I told Brad, I had to call Brad and remind myself what this even was, because we had so many little moments, and I was like, I hate to pay you a compliment, but this headline got a lot of attraction. He's like, yeah, I know. But this was... it was another instance of L&C. So essentially, this was the resolution calendar. A lot of this all stems from the fact that Chairman Jared Patterson, at the very beginning of session, when the House rules are being debated on the floor, moved to essentially expedite debate and say, we're going to vote on this bill or the House rules now and not hear these amendments or these changes to these House rules that a lot of members were very excited about. Basically, it's their way of amending the process by which they can operate on the floor. And that's a big deal for members. It's far more intricate and important than folks might think, because the general population has no idea how the House operates. But for members and how they can kill bills or move things through the process, it's very important. And it's it is the first big debate of the legislative session. So when that happened and they moved forward, when Chairman Patterson made that move, a lot of folks got pretty angry. And then he is chairman of the Local and Consent Committee, that calendar. He puts that together. And so this was in some part a show of defiance to that, saying, hey, we didn't like what happened back here. So let's talk about, killing this calendar. But on this specific day, there was a resolution for former Planned Parenthood president, I believe. I don't want to get her title wrong, Cecile Richards on the floor. And Republicans
and this is was it mother of Ann Richards, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is another weird connection people don't think about.
Or daughter. I can't remember. But regardless, this was on the floor. The resolution was there. Republicans were pretty up in arms that this was taking time out of the legislative calendar to honor this person that they felt was entirely antithetical to what they believe. And it was a Democrat resolution. And so instead of letting that happen, there was all this debate on the floor, and essentially the calendar got killed. So enough members came together, signed their names on a piece of paper, and killed the calendar, essentially. And when you say kill the calendar, they moved the bills back to a committee. So they could still be brought back to the floor at a later date or moved and put on a different calendar. But it was very, very notable. And a lot of those moments have happened this legislative session.
Do you think that there's been a shift, I guess, within the conservative movement towards, different brands of conservatism that's made its way into influencing how our current members operate?
Oh, absolutely. I think every session, even if somebody may vote on the bills in the same way that they did 4 years ago, let's say they were here 4 years ago, I think that who's in the White House matters a lot. I think the general wins matter a lot. I think MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, has become kind of out of left field for some folks, a big issue. And we see Texas legislators legislating on those issues and finding ways to, kind of jump in on what the administration's doing. So absolutely. And even when it comes to personality or approach or rhetoric, I think I'd say the same thing, right? If there's somebody in the Oval Office who's making statements and acting a certain way, people are like, hey, it's working, I'm going to do it too, right? So it certainly can lead the way for conservatives in Texas to kind of follow along or deviate.
Yeah, and I think the MAHA movement's a good example of something that I wasn't expecting. Like last session, I wouldn't have predicted that we'd be talking about school lunches during session, right? And then who was it? Was it Senator Hughes who brought up the food dyes and some other additives, trying to get those out of school lunches. And that's just something that, like we were saying, comes out of the national news and influences Texas. The other thing that was I wanted to find out about were some of the other moments of drama that have happened throughout session. Are any coming to mind for you?
Oh gosh, I think there are plenty. And this is what's interesting about the session. I think we'll get into this more later, but the speaker and the lieutenant governor, jury was out earlier this session on how they would operate with each other and if they would be at all able to get along just based on past history with previous speakers. With the new speaker coming in, how will that work? So far it's been pretty congenial. I think it's been a pretty solid session for them, but that does not mean that House members and Senate members haven't had their moments where they're at each other's throats, right? There's this interesting rivalry between the two chambers, which I think, unless you're watching like we are all the time, might go over your head a little bit or you may not notice it. But there is this okay, the House did this. Well, the Senate did this. it's interesting. Like they're
I think where
tallying
you could
keeping score.
see it very clearly was last session during property tax.
100%.
That was, I think, the most visible fights where they were going back and forth on Twitter. And so this is, I think, a big deviation from that now.
Oh, yes, with the Speaker and Lieutenant Governor. Like they were absolutely, that was Speaker Phelan then, and we have Speaker Burrows now, absolutely were at each other's throats over that. And at one point they were even, there were memes online. They were making memes of each other and photoshopping their heads on different things. It was
Again,
very
things
interesting.
you wouldn't think to call years ago that's how political discourse would
like
go.
This is what's happening with Texas state leaders. But that hasn't, just because there's congeniality between the Lieutenant Governor and the Speaker this session doesn't mean that there are still those moments. So one that comes to mind, Chairman Jeff Leach essentially was about to hear a Senate bill in his committee late at night and paused and said, you know what, I'm going to take a break on this. We're not going to hear this bill until my bill gets heard, or the changes that the Senate wants to make to the bill aren't as concerning to me. So that was interesting. Gene Wu, who's a Democrat from Houston, he's also the chairman of the Democratic Caucus. He, at several different points this legislative session, has come forward and been like, Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry. How many bills has the House passed that came from the Senate? How many bills has the Senate passed that came from the House? Basically saying, like, we're passing your stuff, go pass our stuff. So all that stuff is still happening behind the scenes. At the beginning of session, there were a bunch of conversations about who would carry what bill, like some members saying, oh, this has been my issue for so long. Well, we're going to give that issue to somebody else. We want them to carry it this session. All those things are still happening. They're just a little bit more subtle or behind the scenes. I think tort reform has been a huge lobby effort this session that might go under the radar a little bit, not in Austin, but throughout the state. That's been a huge issue that's taken up a lot of the oxygen.
I'll say that that's something that hasn't come like by anything that I've seen. So that's probably, like you're saying, really under the radar. And so what's happening with that then?
Well, there's a lot of money being poured into it. So you'll see ads in members' districts.
Well, will you explain what this tort reform would look like and what would do to begin with?
It's a great question. So tort reform in Texas has a long history, right? So this is something that groups in Texas have consistently, I think Texans for Lawsuit Reform, TLR, has been at the forefront of this for many, many years now.
And I know TPPF was founded on partially tort reform, which for us, our priorities moved forward. I think it's like in the 2010s.
Yes.
So,
yeah, it's exactly. To your point, it has been around for a long time at this point. Now, of course, every session there's still some sort of reiteration of those discussions, or how are we going to approach tort reform? And essentially, it just comes down to, in a legal battle, who gets a little bit more preference to really.
And just to explain what tort reform is real quick, sorry, because
so
I feel like that's important. It's, or sorry, you can go ahead.
So we're good. So and what I would say is, like, when you have tort reform will come. It's a lot of frivolous lawsuits. So you'll hear people talking about frivolous lawsuits, and the McDonald's coffee case is most often, I think, cited in this.
Where someone got
old
burned by
lady
it.
was in a drive-through, spilled coffee on herself, and suffered severe burns. And they were very severe. But of course, that sounds very frivolous. And it's like, oh, if you can sue McDonald's for millions of dollars for spilling coffee on yourself, that seems kind of crazy. And so the tort reform side would say, let's reform this so that there isn't as much for an entity to lose if somebody does take up some sort of lawsuit against them. And the other side would say, well, let's protect this person who suffered this at the hands of a company. So those are the two sides of that argument. We're still seeing that in Texas, that debate. But this session, and I'd encourage folks to go read Brad Johnson's coverage at the Texan, because it's been awesome, and it really goes into everything. But it's like, they call it the trucking bill, and committee hearings were all about folks who suffered incredibly severe injuries, or folks who'd lost family members, or just different things like that. And then on the other end, you have small business owners, or just business owners, who are saying, this has like completely changed the way we do business and makes it really, really difficult to move forward in any substantive way. And so the argument now is like, okay, what point do we stop moving forward with this kind of reform? But the whole reason that it's going under the radar a little bit because it is an unwieldy legal discussion, but a lot of money is being spent by these groups coming in and running ads in members' districts about totally unrelated issues. They're not running ads on tort reform. They're running ads on child gender modification, or the border, or crazy things that are happening, and relating it back to what they want to see happen.
Oh, so interesting. Yes. So they're utilizing what the district might care about to then try to say, oh, and it ties into this other thing.
And then the member sees who it's paid for by, and they're like, oh, okay, this isn't even about the border or child. Like, this is about something entirely different.
Yeah, that's an interesting one that I didn't even think about. The one that has been on a lot of people's minds recently and at the beginning of this week and last week people were talking about is bail reform. And I think the reason it kept coming up because the governor has made it such a prominent issue and something that he said he really cares about, and it was kind of determining for all of us in the Austin politosphere. That's the word I used to describe it, or in my case the policy sphere.
Yes.
But we're trying to figure out, like, okay, are we coming back for a special session? Like, what does my summer look like? Because plans change based on special sessions. So I think even a few weeks ago we're like, okay, special session 50-50, where are we now and what's happened with bail reform?
Yes, so we're recording what is today? Tuesday,
yes.
And these bills are about to be heard on third reading. So they passed yesterday. And essentially what this does is say, okay, the concerns primarily stemmed from PR bonds, so personal recognizance bonds, and folks who'd committed heinous or violent acts being let out on bond that was very, very low considering the crime, and also then reoffending. And Governor Abbott said, hey, I really wanted to tackle this legislative session. And I think because one of these bills, it's a package, so there's multiple bills as a part of this reform. And the governor, one of them is a constitutional amendment. A constitutional amendment requires 2/3 vote and not just a simple majority, which means that some Democrats in the Texas House had to cross over in order for this bill to pass. So there was a lot of discussion leading up to your point. Like, if this was just a normal run-of-the-mill bill, it would have passed with flying colors, no worries whatsoever. That's not what happened here. And so the constitutional amendment was what people had eyes on. And in the weeks leading up to this specific constitutional amendment being on the floor, there were lots of conversations about whether there would be a special session and whether Democrats could jump on board. I mentioned Gene Wu, the Democratic caucus chair. He had said repeatedly that, we'll see. That was his rhetoric. At one point, he even said, this is just an issue. Like, we don't disagree that there's an issue, but the governor wants to use this in his campaign and yada, kind of making it political. And I do want to say, everyone uses politics and what passes in a legislative session or doesn't pass in a legislative session for political purposes. Doesn't mean that they don't believe those issues super genuinely on either side of the aisle. But that was the argument. And as we got closer and closer to the House being or hearing these bills, it kind of became clear, okay, some concessions were made, some Democrats got on board, and I think this is going to pass just fine. And it did. I think the constitutional amendment I'm talking about too got like over 130 votes out of 150. There were only 8 dissenters.
Oh wow, okay,
which is
so that's
wild.
some bipartisan work right there.
Major. And
Yeah.
I think that's, if you would have asked us at the beginning of session what the vote count would be, we would have thought it would be a lot closer than that. So that happened, and certainly I think circumvents the need for a special session at this point. I'm trying to think of an issue that could cause a special session.
The only thing I potentially heard is out of the Senate, I know that, so we talked about what Governor Abbott's wanted this session, which was school choice, and then it seems bail reform. And then Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, what have been some of his priorities that might come through at the end?
Yeah, so today, actually, the THC ban is being heard in the House. It's passed the Senate, and essentially this is the Lieutenant Governor trying to crack down on some of these products that are sold in stores available to a lot of different folks. And his concern is, he specifically mentioned a lot of these drinks or consumables that are marketed to be attractive to children. That's his concern. So we'll see what happens with that. But the House is debating that today. Now, I do also want to say the governor is the only one who can call a special session. So just because this doesn't pass and it's the lieutenant governor's priority doesn't mean that he could get folks back in Austin for it, right? So that would mean that the governor would have to really be gung-ho about this THC ban too, which I don't foresee that being prominent enough in his mind to call folks back for. But who knows?
Right. I guess we'll see. By the time people are hearing this, we'll probably know a little bit more about where that legislation went than we do. So we've talked a lot about Texas right now. Nationally, what are some of the things that you're looking at, or what's coming across your feed on Instagram?
On Instagram, that's a good question.
Or any of the social medias. Pick your side of choice that
well,
you
on
doom
TikTok,
scroll.
I see a lot of sweet tea clips. I will say.
Take it. Thank you.
Let me think. Obviously the Diddy Trial is going on right now, and that's been a huge, horrible mess of a thing.
And I feel like with all of the celebrity trials, it's getting everyone involved. I think I purposely have resisted looking into the stories.
It's a lot.
I feel like, yes, it's very heavy.
It's icky, it's hard, it's awful, it's heartbreaking. There's a lot to it. I wouldn't even know where to begin in talking about it in a way that's like palatable or okay.
Well, I
It's
think
tough,
something
but it is
that's interesting that we can talk about is how Hollywood, that used to be very glamorized, a very distant thing. I think that social media has brought a lot of like cracks and breakthroughs in that. And then I feel like people are getting a little bit disillusioned by celebrity in general. And then stories like this, I just think, reinforce why people are so fed up with celebrities. Have you noticed that to be a trend as well?
Oh, for sure. I think what's interesting in this case, too, is that it's not live streamed. So everything we're hearing about the case is all from folks who are reading the news articles or reading the transcripts. Like
It's different than the Johnny Depp trial.
That's exactly. Yeah, that's a perfect comparison. It's just very different. And I think that disillusionment with Hollywood has been a huge reason why folks are so much more ready to go and believe stories from folks now who've been in and around these things. I think Cassie Ventura, she's was a longtime romantic partner of Diddy, and she's always on the stand, and folks are just very ready to believe what she's saying. I think for good reason, right? There's a lot to be said there, and other folks have come out, and it's also, I think, we hear so many stories about Hollywood and they sound so crazy, and we're like, oh, does that really happen? And It just seems like this is a case where everything happened that people could possibly think of in the spectrum of crazy, wild, depraved Hollywood stories. This is literally that. And there are so many people coming out and kind of confirming that this is true. So that in and of itself is like, I think what is hooking people so much to this story.
There's do you remember a few months ago, and maybe weeks ago, I don't know, the internet moves so fast, but there was that conversation about if you, like, for women, like if you were in a forest, would you rather be like trapped, like if you were alone in a forest
or a man?
Yes, with a random bear or a random man. And a lot of women chose bear. And so I was watching, I forgot who I was scrolling through on Instagram, and there was a guy who's just saying like, yeah, like keeping up with this Diddy trial, I think I finally understand why so many women said bear. And I said bear even. So I thought that was like an interesting take, because this is and I don't, again, like I think that especially in the conservative side, we're very every time like someone will blame toxic masculinity, I think a lot of us will go, oh, hold up, is that actually what we're talking about here? And in this case we see like, no, this is like the complete total human depravity and
like at display in a really egregious kind of way where the stories like don't even sound real.
Right.
They sound insane.
And it's that weird area where it's like, well, this isn't like super common, but it can happen. And that's the
point.
Yeah.
And not just that they can happen, because you're right, it is rare, but that so many people knew about it or were present for it. And I think that's also what's interesting, is just because someone's pictured with Diddy at a party doesn't mean they knew exactly what was going on. Because it seems like there were kind of two levels to the parties, where you got escorted upstairs and a whole other thing was happening that was not happening downstairs. But that in and of itself, like so many people are connected to Diddy and what he was doing, that it makes it even that more intriguing.
Yeah,
and
I'm honestly surprised this hasn't brought up Epstein again.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it's been weird for me. I feel like, again, like whenever the Epstein stuff was happening, what was that, like 2021? I think it was still COVID time. But I remember at the time being like, I feel like eventually this is going to slide away. They're just going to like try to find a way to bury all of it. And even now I'm just wondering, like, we're getting more files from Trump. Like, where's the Epstein stuff, please?
Well, even Ghislaine Maxwell's trial was so, who was the accomplice to Epstein. Her trial was so under the radar. It was very odd. Like, you'd have to scroll down any major news outlet's page to find any coverage of it. It was so weird.
Anyway, it's just weird thing happening. So to like transition away from like being sad, because it's I want sweeter tea. I know this is the other thing that I've been kind of avoiding that, and so thankfully that's not taking up too much of my feed with people speaking about it.
Continue avoiding it.
Yeah, the stuff that I've been seeing in the last week, I guess, is stuff about the Cannes Film Festival, which is the one that's in France. And something that stood out to me was Jennifer Lawrence and Robert Pattinson appearing together because they're in a new movie together. So I'm not sure if that came across your feed or not.
It did not. So I need to know why this. I need to know the lore behind this, because is this like a movie that they're premiering?
Yeah. So it's going through the film festival stuff right now. So the movie is called Die My Love, and I think it's a like heavier film about, I think it was postpartum depression is what I read about it. But I think the reason why it stood out to me and some like other girlies online is remembering that fangirl era of the 2010s and these two people from that internet sphere now being together in a movie. I guess
if you think about it, like its base, it's the Hunger Games and Twilight.
Yes.
That's so crazy to think
Which
about.
I think are a lot of the same girlies from there.
For sure. I'm sure.
anyway, it's just a weird time to reflect on how much has happened since
And how
then.
different they
and
are
how different they are, how
perceived
different
now.
we are too.
Yes.
Like grown-ups now, they're grown up.
Yeah, exactly. We're all grown ups now.
Anyway, that's just a funny thing that I've been seeing. Another cultural point, though, that happened with the film festival, they have new rules about what celebrities could wear. So I'm not sure if well, of course you probably noticed this, how if you're looking at red carpets, there's a lot of outfits that sometimes make me ask, like, does that count as clothing if I can see
For sure. Everything.
I think the biggest offender of that was obviously with Kanye's wife.
Yes.
And that being something, I think that was the initial
That wasn't even that long ago.
no, but I think that's where we started seeing people go, okay, maybe we found the line. And so this film festival is like, okay, guys, you can't be nude on the carpet just because there's like a sheer layer. If we can see everything, then that's not clothing. So do you?
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, have you noticed that there's been anything online or in the culture where people are, I guess, becoming more conservative, I guess, in their daily lives, even if not in political?
I feel like if somebody dresses very classically, they are praised for it. And I think it has to be done obviously well. Like they have to dress, where it looks polished and, critics love it, that whole thing that I don't understand. But I think there is a lot to be said for folks who are dressing a little bit more classically, who are praised for those things. I think even about the Met Gala this year, because I actually think Con oftentimes has really classy, beautiful, like folks dress really beautifully for Con, and I don't know if it's just because of the setting or how classic the festival is. Like it is, maybe, and I could be wrong, but I don't usually see people dressing as scandalously there. So and it makes sense that would be the organization that would say, hey, we're gonna put some dress codes on this situation then, right?
Like wear a dress, for example, instead
Yes, like
of
maybe a novel concept. But I think there is a little bit of a tide turning there, which is interesting to see at play, because the whole like women empowerment, wear what you want, like that whole thing is still totally at play. But I think there is something to be said. I hadn't thought of that before, with more classic approaches to things. And there are, you'll see someone dress beautifully and the comments will all say, okay, so you don't have to dress so crazy in order to, draw attention or to look beautiful. So I think there is something to that.
And it's interesting that the trend of, I think we've seen in like the last maybe 5 years, is that old money aesthetic that's coming through.
Yes,
and
or like coastal grandma.
Right, exactly. And even though those are usually like stuff that would just be trend, like Brat was last summer or that other thing.
Yeah.
But those seemed like moments in time versus this return for even younger people going back to the, like you're saying, coastal grandma, old money aesthetic.
Yeah.
A little bit more reserved.
Baggy jeans, sweaters, like the whole thing.
It's just interesting that that's kind of taking, it's lasting a little bit longer than most trends would.
Yeah.
So I think it's showing something that the younger generations are craving. I don't know what it is, but maybe they're just not as enticed by like flashiness, or maybe it's just even being desensitized after so many years to just seeing everything
That's
someone
a good
at
point.
anything, where they're just like, well, you can't go any farther than that, as we've seen, other than Kanye trying to, I guess.
That's the thing. It's like, at what point can you not go any further? And like, I think you're right that Kanye's wife kind of hit that nail on the head, literally. Like you can't go further than that.
Yeah.
So,
well, I want to take we've talked about some of the things all the way to international stuff. I want to bring it back to some of the things going on in Texas right now. So other than I guess our interest with seeing what's happening in France at the film festival, other foreign topics that have been coming up in Texas have been about China and other countries like Russia having influence in Texas. What's going on there?
yes. So this is Senate Bill 17. This bill was passed in the House a couple of weeks ago now. I think my I could be wrong. My sense of time and space is completely whacked
Warped
out.
spring
Yeah,
session,
exactly. At this point,
It feels
in
like it's
session.
been 5 years and 2 weeks.
Exactly. But essentially, this bill aims to prevent folks from hostile foreign nations from purchasing land in Texas, specifically citing concerns like, there have been instances in which a billionaire associated with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, purchased land in Texas very close to military bases, and folks were like, whoa. Okay, let's talk about this. And so that bill's aimed at those instances. And there's a short list of countries that make that or are designated as such in the bill. So it's not folks from a lot of countries. It's a handful. That passed through the House after a lot of debate. I'd argue it was one of the most contentious bipartisan contentious partisan debates we've heard all session. And finally, the bill passed. It was late into the night. And what was notable is that there's a specific amendment tacked on by Representative Matt Shaheen that dealt more specifically with visa holders. I think student visas was a big part of that conversation, saying, hey, okay, maybe we should let folks who are here in that capacity still purchase land. The bill has to go back to the Senate then after passing the House. And basically the senator who's the author, Lois Kolkhorst, has to determine whether she's going to say, yeah, this bill's good, let's move it forward to the governor's desk, or no, we have some changes still to make, let's go to conference committee where members from both chambers come together in a closed door meeting and kind of hash out their differences. She opted for a conference committee and was asked by Democrat Senator Jose Menendez, essentially, is it this Shaheen amendment that's part of the deal here as to why you want to go to conference? And she was like, it's on the table. So we'll see what comes out of conference. I'll be very curious what version comes out, but that bill is certainly headed to the governor's desk. It'll just matter what version
So that's something that should come out of this session.
Yes.
Then it's interesting that an issue like that, which is where there's this cross between liberty and security, is something that I think goes back to the national level and something that started being a point of contention within the right wing from probably the early 2000s, right? During the Bush administration, and even what we're seeing now with how Trump handles foreign politics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's, again, I'm talking about political cover for folks trying to figure that balance between liberty and security out. If the administration, which is a very popular administration among a lot of Republicans,
right,
is doing A, B, or C, they're like, okay, great, we're in line, right? And they have political cover to kind of take care of those things. I'll also say the bill does designate or does give the governor some authority to say, hey, we're going to, even if there was somebody in the White House who was not designating a country as a hostile foreign nation under the text of the bill, the governor would still have some jurisdiction to say, actually, we're going to include that country in that list. So that's very interesting too.
I like things that make things more Texan, so. But that's interesting, at least, that's the direction where Texans are taking it.
Yeah.
So if for all of these stories and stuff, I mean, this is where I feel like the Texan is pretty unique, that on your show you guys talk about everything as well, from a few pop cultural things, but also the nitty gritty of the politics. And even on especially Smoke-Filled Room, I feel like you guys are able to get into the background stuff where people the conversations that we're not usually a part of. So if people want to be able to follow more of that, where can they find you guys?
I'm so glad you asked. We are available. All our website is thetexan.news, and that's where you can read all of our articles. You can listen to all of our podcasts. You can subscribe, which is a big deal to us. We are subscriber funded, and so that's a very big deal when folks are able to come and support what we do. We're also on Instagram, TikTok. Yeah, TikTok, kind of crazy. Facebook. We're all over YouTube, all over the place, and that is where folks can find podcasts or articles or rundowns from our reporters. So I'd also encourage folks to go follow our reporters if they want insight on the last couple weeks of the legislative session. We got Brad Johnson, we have Mary-Lise Cosgray, we have Cameron Abrams, Holly Hansen, Kim
Would
Roberts,
recommend Brad's Twitter for sure.
Brad's Twitter's awesome, as much as I hate to say it. But they're all working so hard and doing such a great job covering these issues. Cameron joked after school choice was passed. He's like, well, I don't have a job anymore. I've worked, what am I supposed to do now? School choice is passed. He was covering that for since the moment we hired him. And he has 17 other beats. He's just fine.
See, in the past, you'd say, I have great job security if that's what I'm covering.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is crazy now seeing where Isabel Parrot's come.
It's wild. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you guys want to find more about the Sweet Tea series, you can follow us on Instagram at Spilling Sweet Tea, our YouTube channel. We're on the Texas Public Policy Foundation's YouTube channel, so definitely subscribe to us there. Thank you so much for helping me hash out all the stuff that's been happening. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show again.
Thanks for having me again. It's been fun to be back.
All right, everybody, summer is almost here. We'll see you next time.